Okay, let's talk about from whom I like to learn. Hello and welcome back to The Commonplace. My name is Autumn and I am the host of The Commonplace podcast and the host, I guess, of these videos as well, which we call Common Mom videos, because here we are common moms who are trying to learn how to apply classical Charlotte Mason pedagogy to all of life so that we can make truth, goodness, and beauty something that our kids feel, touch, taste, smell, and hear in the commonplace things of life. And so I'm really glad that you're here today. I had a request, which was really nice, to know exactly what I am learning from. Who do I listen to? What kind of podcasts? What kind of YouTubers? Because I am, yes, always learning. So I frequently say that I am not a special unicorn, that there is not something that is like super amazing and wise about me. What I've learned to do is to swim deep in the wisdom of the classical tradition, of tradition on the whole. Because as much as we think with the fancy little handy dandy phones in our back pockets that we have access to all the information, all that is true, that we can know for ourselves on our own terms what is right, if we can test everything and figure it all out in a vacuum, I actually don't think we can do that. I really do rely on the classical tradition to point me to the books that I should be reading, the things that I should be thinking about, the things that I should be loving, and how even I might need to love them. And so I love to point to other resources. In fact, the point of The Commonplace, as it originally began, was that I wanted to be a bridge from the starting line of the homeschooling journey to all of the great resources that already exist in the classical world. There are amazing teachers and books and resources, podcasts, different things like that. And I am hoping to help women get their bearings well enough that they are then able to continue on to the great resources that exist. And so to that end, today I'm actually going to tell you the resources I learn from. Who are the people I listen to? Who are the people that I read? Different things like that. Well, actually, we're not doing reading today. The reading is the Mother Culture series. I'll go ahead and link it for you. If you don't know, I talk about collections of books you should read for various ideas and topics and interests. And that's what I'm reading. Today we're gonna talk about what I listen to. So the original question was, who do I follow on YouTube? And YouTube is actually a new thing for me. I make these videos because my husband told me he said, you should probably make videos for YouTube to go along with the podcast. And so here I am. I probably honestly would not be doing this on my own. I prefer the hidden nature of the podcast world. I think they're helpful resources. I hope they're helpful resources for the people who listen to my podcast. But in terms of who do I follow on YouTube that's classical educator, I don't. I usually use YouTube to find a specific thing. I think a lot of people do that. Like, oh, I want to know, does anyone have a timetable for this? Or has anyone walked through how you might structure this lesson? I'm not really much of a YouTube follower. I do like particular channels, but they have nothing to do with education. So we're gonna skip over the YouTube category and just head over to the podcast. And I'm like a lot of busy moms with young kids. I like podcasts because I can listen to them while I'm doing other things. That's kind of the perk, right? And I think the auditory tradition is a great one. I think audiobooks are really wonderful. I don't think anyone should knock you down if you listen to your books rather than holding the book. That's how people did it for a really long time. Before I tell you all these other great podcasts, if you don't know, The Commonplace is a podcast, and I would love for you to check it out. So I will be linking it below along with these other great podcasts. But I did want to make sure, in case you're new here, that you know I have a podcast. So when it comes to podcasts about classical education or Charlotte Mason education, although they do go together, when I want to learn something and I really want my mind blown, I always go and check out the old Ask Andrew from the Cersei Podcast Network. So Cersei, if you don't know about them, I will link them as well below. They are an amazing resource for classical educators. I love hopping on their website to look for new articles. Joshua Gibbs is a favorite writer over there. Lindsay Brigham Knott is another one. And Andrew Kern runs it. We are not related Kerns, but he's also a Kern. And he has a podcast called Ask Andrew. And I think maybe they're old conference talks or different things like that, but he's just answering questions about teaching classically or the classical tradition. And he will blow your mind, some of the connections he makes between education and scripture, but I always love learning from him, even if I have to re-listen to it a couple of times because he's incredibly smart. Another one that I like to tune into is The New Mason Jar from Cindy Rollins. You do need to look The New Mason Jar up. It's no longer The Mason Jar. And that's another one that I will scroll through and see what people are talking about. And she pulls in Charlotte Mason educators from all over the place to talk about all sorts of things. And I feel like I always leave with like a little Charlotte Mason pep in my step after I listen to her. So that's always a good one as well. Thinking Love is one by two Charlotte Mason moms. I really appreciate their podcast. I rarely hear anyone nail the context of Mason statements as much as I hear these women do it. They are very well read, very steeped in Mason's volumes. And so when they bring up ideas, when they bring out particular quotes or lines, it is always couched in the context, which is the most helpful way to read anything. But particularly with Mason, a lot of her stuff gets yanked out of context in order to be put on Instagram or Pinterest quotes. quotes or different things like that. And it can really harm a mom because it ends up burdening you because it's not a right use of Mason's point or her principle. And on Thinking Love, I have always appreciated and respected how well they prepare and explain what they are teaching about from the Mason pedagogy. And then another one also from the Circe Network, you'll actually find a lot of Circe ones on my podcast queue. I really adore Circe. I'm a big fangirl of the Circe Institute, but Dwell is another one that is for homeschooling moms. So a lot of the things over at Circe are for classical educators who are in the classroom, but Dwell is for homeschooling moms, and they are seasoned homeschool moms. They've graduated their kids, they teach and lead, and so they have such a deep well of wisdom, and they apply it to really ordinary things. Things is why spread is like something like marriage, like what if your husband doesn't want to read Homer? Like how are you supposed to kind of connect on these things, all the way to how do you train habits in the teenage years? So they have this nice blend of what has usually been understood as classical versus some very specific Mason ideas and bringing her into the tradition. And I always feel like I'm getting to sit down at a table of the wise classical Charlotte Mason moms that I don't have just readily available to me in my actual location, but I get to join in with them through the podcast. So Dwell is another great one. My second point is that at some point you cannot keep thinking about classical education or living a classical life. You just have to jump in. If you think these things are good for your children, you need to just start living them out yourself. And so to that end, a lot of that for me comes through the reading life. That's why I have the Mother Culture series, which is all about reading, because Mother Culture is done through the habit of engaging with ideas. But these are some podcasts that I really love for that. So Close Reads is one. The Literary Life podcast is another. I will go and search to see if they have a podcast series, they're not full seasons, but series on any book that I'm about to read. And then if they do, a lot of times I will read the book, go listen to that podcast episode, read the next section, go listen to that podcast episode. And I have definitely learned to be a better reader because of them. And I've also just really enjoyed learning all these different things about layers in the story that I would have missed. And it's just been a delight to tune in. And so Close Reads is a Circe one, and the Literary Life podcast is Cindy Rollins, Angelina Stanford, and Thomas Banks. And if you know anything about Angelina Stanford, you know that she might be the only person that loves C.S. Lewis more than I do, maybe, but she is absolutely one of the most interesting thinkers that I know of in the literary world. Another one is Classical Stuff You Should Know, which is hosted by they're actually now just two are classical teachers. They used to be three classical educators at a school in Texas, I believe. Now one is no longer at the school, but indeed the classical life continues. They are so much fun. So they do have podcast episodes that cover things like what are the first three liberal arts, or what is classical education. But really they love to talk about old books, old things, old art. And then sometimes they will bring in a modern book that is talking about old things, old books, old art, and different things like that. And they have this really fun dynamic. They're nerdy in like a properly good way, but they're also very funny. And you feel like, oh yes, I could tackle the Odyssey after listening to AJ explain. Or I could understand this work by Plato after Graham explains it, because they take what can sometimes seem too academic or too far off for a particular type of person, and they just bring it down and they say, no, look, this has stood the test of time because something about it has touched people, old, young, rich, poor, Christian, pagan, and they keep coming back to it. And so you feel like, oh yeah, this was made for me. This is my inheritance as a person, and I should join the conversation at the table. And so Classical Stuff You Should Know is also a really good one. And then lastly, Speaking with Joy is another favorite of mine. Speaking with Joy is one that I will listen to. I don't care what she's talking about. I love to listen to her. This is Joy Clarkson. If you know Sally Clarkson, this is her daughter. And she recently graduated with her PhD from the University of St. Andrews. And so she often likes to, her work did center around what I think she was using for her dissertation. And so she would look at art, the imagination, theology, story, and how those things interplay in our formation. And so sometimes she'll do book clubs about certain books she's reading that she'll lead you through discussions or have guests join in. And other times she's just talking about what I would call the sacramental imagination or the sacramental life as understood in books, music, and art. And so once you're like really in the ideas and just want to grow in them and find them interesting and want to hear a discussion about them, I think Speaking with Joy is one of my absolute favorite podcasts. And then lastly, don't forget that you can buy conference talks. You can buy resources from your favorite teachers online. This is something I'm trying to be better about, particularly as now I see how much goes into content creation as I work on the Commonplace, that if you really enjoy learning from someone and they do have conference talks you can buy, a paid platform, a paid Substack where they write long form articles, things like that, it's worth your time to pay to get their better content. It's usually their best content, right? The stuff they're really thinking about wrestling through, wanting to bring you along within the journey. And so I am trying to be better about actually putting my money behind the people I'm learning. And so a couple of people that I really like to do that and want to continue to do that for It'd be Joshua Gibbs. Again, anything from the Cersei Institute. They have their old yearly conferences up online, so you can buy particular talks. I will buy anything from Heidi White. She is another classical educator that I really adore and love to learn from. One of my favorite talks that I've purchased has been about how classical education nourishes and heals the soul. And that was just one of the most fascinating dives I've taken into the formation of a person through classical education and what it can do to reform us if we've been malformed in our life, whether by the sins of others, our own sins, or just feasting on a diet of really crappy modern ideas. And so she's another one. Again, Angelina Stanford is one that I will follow around, still debating that I love C.S. Lewis more, but wanting to hear everything that she has to say about the literary life. And those are kind of my online current people. I do sincerely recommend that you be reading old books the most. If you have time, spend it there. I will continue with my Mother Culture series probably the whole time I'm on YouTube. And you can see all of those through the links. But if you are looking for things that you can plug into, I recommend these. And I want to say that almost all of these will require more time. They're not as short as even my podcast, but maybe some of the easier podcasts to listen to. And the ideas therein need to be digested. So don't just binge these sorts of podcasts. These are podcasts and speakers that I think you really need to sit and enjoy and really give time to, and maybe narrate to someone about what you've learned and let it sort of stretch itself around your life and in the contours of your mind as you just go about your day, rather than always having something go. So on the way out, that's my tip. Don't just play podcasts all the time. Don't just play YouTube all the time. Find the resources that you think are very good, and then those that you think are excellent, which are going to be very few, and stick with those. The like pretty good, the okay, the I like it sometimes, honestly just becomes a waste of time when you're a busy mom, particularly a homeschooling mom who does not have a lot of time alone. So really pursue those really good things. And I think everything that I'm linked below for you fits that very good or excellent bill. And so I hope you find someone new to learn from. And to that end, happy learning. I'll talk to you guys soon.